What if I told you that there's a JoJo's game with an even more insane plot than the actual series? JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Eyes of Heaven is a game that's almost written as like a fan fiction for the JoJo fan base. The essential plot of this game is gonna put you as part 3 Jotaro traveling throughout all 8 parts of JoJo to find the 9 parts of the Holy Corpse to fight a reincarnated, made in heaven version of Dio, which is insanely overpowered. And when I say this is almost written as a fan fiction, you get to see things like a young Jotaro meeting people like Josuke and Giorno, or maybe if you've ever questioned what would it be like if older Joseph met younger Joseph. Even just cool scenes like this to where you have all 8 of the JoJo's protagonists teaming up to defeat the most overpowered version of Dio. A Dio that has traveled between all of the parallel worlds of the JoJo's universe to find the parts of the Holy Corpse and become insanely powerful. If you're a JoJo's fan, just promise me you're going to want to watch this through because it's going to get even more bizarre than the actual plot of the main series. You start off in Cairo, Egypt at the end of part 3 Stardust Crusaders, jumping you right into the final battle of both Jotaro and Dio, where Dio squirts his blood into Jotaro's eyes to blind him, but Jotaro basically is unfazed and still hits the world, shattering it and defeating Dio. And yes, this really is as insane as that sounded, so if you probably didn't understand that, or if you think that that may have sounded a little bit weird, you probably won't get a lot about what happens in this story, so I recommend you go read JoJo's or watch it, however you want to enjoy it. But instead of the original timeline to where this leads into the part 4, 5, 6, and then the reboot with 7 and 8, this is now going to be an alternate timeline, and this is where the fan fiction type of writing comes along. As Jotaro, Polnareff, and Joseph are all saying their goodbyes at the airport, all of a sudden Avdol and Iggy, rest in peace to both of them, somehow are just back alive and now have like this purple Super Saiyan aura around them, and they start attacking the main crew and you get in a fight with them. And surprisingly, not being that weirded out about the fact that their dead friends just came back to life and fought them, they're just kind of very confused about why are they even here, and they just assume it to be like a stand power. Joseph says that he can use his Hermito Purple power to find out who these two are, but they both vanish before he's able to. But it's not over yet because now Kakyoin and Endul are here too, talking about how they have now devoted their life to the Noble One, which, keep this mysterious figure in mind, he'll come up a lot throughout this. This launches you into another battle against your former friend and a former enemy once again, with afterwards, after you defeat them, Endul vanishes, but Kakyoin is still laying on the ground defeated. And who else would walk in at this moment other than the GOAT, Speedwagon? And somehow, some way, he just kind of knows everything that's going on. They don't really explain, but he holds out this object and it holds it towards Kakyoin, essentially resurrecting him. So yeah, already we're in a part 3 fanfiction type of timeline to where it's like, well, what if Kakyoin didn't die, or what if he came back to life afterwards? And one pretty funny thing that happens is basically in this little timeline in the story, whenever someone's resurrected, their last memory is literally them dying, and then all of a sudden they're just now alive. So Kakyoin wakes up and he tries to tell the group about how he finally found out what Dio's power is, but Joseph is just like, yeah, don't worry about it, we already found that out and defeated him. And Kakyoin is just like, all right, and doesn't even ask more questions or anything like that. And when they ask him if he knows about who caused him to basically be possessed, he just says that his last memory was literally him being hit into that water tower. Just literally, he was dying and then boom, he's alive. Speedwagon explains that the part that he just used to basically resurrect Kakyoin and get that aura away from him was a part of the Holy Corpse, and he's now going to need the group's help to find all 9 parts of this Holy Corpse to resurrect whichever thing it is to stop all these anomalies that are going on, like what they just experienced. So the group, seeing their friend just resurrected, was just like, well, it's time to set off on another bizarre adventure. Yeah, I'm sorry, that was a bad joke. Let's just keep going. But in true JoJo's plot fashion, there just happens to be another part right nearby where they are, so they're able to find the second part already. But whenever they pick up the part, there's a huge rift into the ground with light coming out of it, and basically Speedwagon, who once again just knows everything about what's going on. They don't really explain how, but I mean, he's Speedwagon, so he explains to them that whenever you find a part, there's going to be this rift that appears, and this rift will allow you to travel throughout different eras of time. You head into the rift, now taking you to part 4, Vento Ario. Now from this point, as you continue throughout the next 8 parts of JoJo, and yes, it's only 8 parts because part 9 wasn't out when this game was released, the general way that each arc plays out is pretty similar, and honestly, if you weren't a JoJo's fan, you would probably just write this off as bad writing, but in true JoJo's fashion, you always have to wait for the ending because that's always the best part of the entire series. Generally, the way that each arc is going to go is you're going to enter into this series and you're going to see someone that died throughout the series now back reincarnated, you're going to fight against them, one of them will run away, but you're able to save one of them and add them to your team. As you enter into Vento Ario, Speedwagon and Jotaro end up in the Coliseum right at the point where both Giorno and his gang just defeated Diavolo, when all of a sudden Misa and Triss just suddenly vanish, and even more strange is Bucciarati walks in, with Jotaro being able to come in just in time to help Giorno fight him off as both Narantia and Fugo both appear, which you have to fight as well, which I just have to say, imagine being Giorno, you go through this entire series, your friends died along the way, you finally beat the gang boss, you finally won, and then all of a sudden you see your friends back alive and they're attacking you. This has to be super traumatic for him. And it's also just really cool to see Jotaro be able to meet Giorno, as I just feel like they would be very similar characters that would somewhat get along well, and I say get along because they don't get along with anybody. So after your brief fights and you save Narantia, you then head through another portal taking you to the train station where you're chasing after Bucciarati, but he still gets away and you're never really able to catch up to him at this point. But one thing that's important that happens here is you find this turtle at the train station. This turtle has a stand power to where basically you can go inside of it and it's just like this secret hideout base, and you're going to use this throughout the series as basically as you recruit new good members into your team, everyone will just be in the turtle, that way you can all just teleport around together. Another important thing up until this point is all the times you keep fighting these possessed people, they keep mentioning this person named the Noble One, and they are basically serving him and he's the source of all of these anomalies going on, but each time before they're able to reveal who he is, they always just seem to vanish or they run away. But after finding another corpse part, you enter into the rift, now taking you to You start with the brief fight against an evil Okuyasu and an evil Rohan, but after you win, Okuyasu runs away, but you're still able to save Rohan. But one thing that's pretty fun about this game as a JoJo's fan is really just the dialogue as you go on, because as Josuke approaches them, Jotaro goes, "Oh, you're Josuke Higashigata," with Joseph just standing there in shock, hearing a, well, familiar name. Now, I honestly can't remember, and I tried looking it up, if at this point in part 3, Joseph, if he was already cheating on his girl with Josuke's mom, but I don't think it happened yet, but for some reason, the name Higashikata just resonates within Joseph. You chase after Okuyasu, which takes you to the Higashikata residence, where Enyaba appears, which is just like one of the most random characters to appear throughout here, but we finally do get some development through her into who the Noble One is after. With Enyaba saying that the Noble One is a king among kings. He's the one who's fit to control the entire world, and if we take him on, we'll be overwritten, which is a specific choice of words that's probably a hint to what's to come. But she says that we'll meet him soon in our final hour and then disappears. But seeing Enyaba helps Jotaro start to kind of piece it together about what's going on, because he thinks about how both Enyaba and then previously we saw Endol was here, and there's only one true person that they would ever pledge their alliance to, and that would be Dio. But I mean, at the very start, he had literally just killed Dio, so that can't be, right? Joseph, alongside Kakurin and Polnareff, come out of the turtle saying that they found the camera, and then Joseph says that he can use his Hermit Purple power to see who is behind all of this. And as he uses his power, what picture comes out other than Dio? Basically just confirming Jotaro's suspicion. And as everyone is freaking out thinking about, well, how can Dio still be alive? Kakurin is standing there like, well, apparently I was supposed to be dead and I'm alive, so at least there's a possibility, which, I mean, good point, Kakuin. You know the drill already. We're gonna find another corpse part now. We're gonna go through the magic light portal, and we're now gonna go to part 1, Phantom Blood. Now enters Jotaro, part 3 in JoJo's part 1, with Speedwagon entering in as well, getting flashbacks to his past as he comes out of the turtle. They enter in right at the moment where Jonathan Joestar is fighting against Dio, with Jonathan injured at this point, so Jotaro steps in to help him out, which, keep in mind, this is part 3 Jotaro with stand ability, so this is in the pre-stand era of JoJo, which is almost like when you're playing a game and you go back to the starting boss when you're already like max level. But before you get to Dio, you have to fight a few zombies, and as you finally are going to approach Dio to fight, who else comes to help him other than part 7's Diego Brando? I mean, this is literally just insane. This is part 1 Dio with part 7 Diego, basically the revamped version. And somehow part 1 Dio just seems oddly knowledgeable about who Diego is, almost as if someone the Noble One has been teaming all of these bad guys up together. And one thing that's funny is Speedwagon is shocked, and he asks if Diego is maybe like Dio's big brother or something, and Diego just says, well, I guess at the limits of people's creativity in this era. I guess maybe like a diss towards the 1980s manga or something, I mean, honestly, who would have thought that JoJo would have gone on so long from part 1 that it would have had like an almost pseudo reboot in part 7? But being both of them, they both run away and you're able to recruit the original JoJo to your team, finding another corpse part and now taking you over to part 2, Battle Tendency. And yes, that means that we're going to have part 3 Old Joseph entering into part 2 where he gets to see the young version of himself, and it's about how you think it would go. Basically, you enter into the point of part 2 where the Pillar Men were doing their initial fight against both Joseph and Caesar, so Caesar still is alive for now. And old Joseph entering in and obviously recognizing this place knows that the Pillar Men are just going to be way too much of a trouble for them to deal with at this point, and he's just focused on the goal of finding all of the Holy Corpse parts. So basically his plan is actually to just lie to them and gaslight them, and after you have just a very brief initial fight with them, he starts lying to them saying that, oh, you guys must be so scared because Joseph and Caesar are getting stronger, and if you keep letting them get stronger, they're going to be able to beat you, so maybe you should allow them a little bit more time so that you guys can have a more fair and more enjoyable fight. And as he's continuing to try and convince them, it's obviously not working too well, so he just glances at his young self with his young version just obviously picking up what he's doing and then just helping him lie against the Pillar Men. The fact that they really thought about how Joseph Part 3 and Joseph Part 2 would act, and they just have them straight up lying and gaslighting to their enemies, is actually just great as a JoJo's fan. It's just little things like that that you can tell that the creators actually put some thought into this, but essentially same thing as before. You're able to successfully gaslight the Pillar Men into leaving, you get another corpse part, and then you now move on to the next part, which is now going to be Part 6. Now remember, this is Part 3 Jotaro now entering into Part 6. The series focus on his future daughter. And as Jotaro enters in, Jolene instantly recognizes Jotaro as her father, but an oddly young version of her father, with Hermes even asking Jolene who's this person that she's with, and her saying, well, I think that's my father, with Jotaro just kind of standing there like, what is this girl saying? And when I say the creators really put thought into this game, as you fight as both Jolene and Jotaro together, they have a special dual heat attack together. Basically, each character in this game have basically what's essentially an ultimate attack, but with this being a game to where you fight as two people at the same time, if you're doing special pairs like someone like Josuke and Okuyasu or Joseph and Caesar, they can do a special ultimate attack together, kind of like the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series. But they actually put some thought into what a Part 3 young Jotaro would be like with the Part 6 Jolene, his future daughter, to where when you attack as these two together, you have a special attack to where Jolene uses her string ability to perfectly position the enemy in the perfect angle for both her and Jotaro to both hit them with an aura attack. It's just like really cool moments like this as a JoJo fan to see they really put some thought into this. But this part is also when you get some advances into who the noble one is, as who walks in other than Pucci. And Pucci even recognizes Jotaro, saying that this is the second time that he's met the Jotaro from 1988. A callback to how Pucci actually met Dio from 1988, which is kind of like his whole plot. And then I guess he also was able to meet Jotaro at the time. Pucci says that we've now arrived at the Eyes of Heaven, which, hey, that's the name of the game. And then he tells Jotaro to let the light of the Holy Corpse guide him, and that he will meet someone so powerful that has even made Pucci forget his own goals to be able to help out this person, and that he will kneel before this new reality as he then disappears. Jolene gets one of the corpse parts, and then you head back to Morioh town, which is now kind of your main hub where everyone's just going to continue to meet up at. Honestly, not too much happens here other than the fact that you get to play against Darby. Yes, they actually brought Darby back, and you have to play against him in a poker game. I just thought this part was pretty interesting, to where basically a core mechanic of it is the fact that you have to actively cheat against him to win. It's just a little poker mini game. Basically, Jolene gets her soul taken, so Jotaro plays Darby to get it back. That's really all that happens. We do get Darby saying something that we've already heard before. Basically, as he's teleporting away, he gives Jotaro the warning to not fight the noble one, as that he has the ability to overwrite things. So we'll see what this means very soon. As you try to go through the portal, for some reason it doesn't instantly teleport you, so everyone comes out of the turtle to see what's going on, and just look at this. It's generally just so cool to see all 8 of the main JoJos just all working together, all in one place at the same time, and then also Koichi for some reason, but he's cool, I guess, he can stay. Speedwagon, who once again just knows everything about the corpse parts for some reason, says that it must be because only certain people are allowed to head to the next part, with both Josuke's and Jonathan's corpse parts resonating at this point, meaning that they basically have authorized entry into the next part. So they agreed to continue on to further the group's plan, heading on to the next part, taking us to one of not just the best JoJo parts, but one of the best mangas period, Part 7 Steel Ball Run. You see Part 1 Jonathan teleporting into seeing his Part 7 counterpart basically of Johnny Jojo. And I just think that's a really cool thing to see Part 1 Jojo meaning the Part 7 Jojo, because Part 7 is basically somewhat of a reboot or like a retelling of the Jojo series, whatever you want to call it, an alternate timeline I guess. And you see Johnny just literally limping there on the beach as he questions who Jonathan is, and Jonathan says that he's here looking for the corpse part, obviously ringing a bell with Johnny, as the corpse part is basically the entire plot of the series that he's been looking for. Jonathan notices Slow Dancer, which is Johnny's horse nearby, who's injured after the fight they just had against Funny Valentine, and he uses his hormone powers to essentially heal Slow Dancer, which proves to Johnny that Jonathan is not a threat, so they decide to team up together to go look for the remaining corpse parts. Both of you head to Rocky Mountain Village to look for these parts, where you face off against both Dio and Diego once again. And one thing I just think is funny is whenever you play as Johnny in this game, you play on your horse, and whenever you get knocked off the horse, they actually just have you crawling around at him. Truly only a JoJo's game could do something like this. After you fight against both of the Dios, you then fight against Valentine, and once you defeat him, he actually says something that's very interesting. Basically, he says that the only people that he thinks that can defeat this new Dio would either be Johnny Joestar, or he thinks that Giorno would be able to defeat him, which I think is very interesting, as I've heard a lot of speculation about if Gold Experience or Queen is actually one of the strongest stands of all time. He vanishes though, we find the corpse part, and we go back to Morioh, but we don't go back to the normal Morioh we're used to. We're now in Morioh in the future, which is part 8 of JoJo. And if you remember, both Jonathan and Josuke parts were resonating, so when they entered the portal, Jonathan went to part 7 and Josuke was actually taken to part 8, which I just love that. I think that's very fitting for JoJo from part 1 to go to part 7, and then JoJo 4 to go to part 8, which is basically the retelling of part 4. And you know what that means? We're gonna have Josuke 4 meeting Josuke 8, who, just to make it easy, from now on I'll refer to Josuke 8 as Gappy. As they enter in, both Joshu and Gappy are talking when Joshu gets possessed, and when you beat him up, Josuke turns him back using the corpse part. And one thing that's funny is Joshu comes back and he looks at Josuke a little bit weird, asking him who he's looking at, and Josuke just doesn't even hesitate, summons Crazy Diamond, knocking him out, saying, "Oh, I thought he wasn't fully healed because he was looking at me crazy." Truly just a Josuke moment. Another piece of cool dialogue here is that the best JoJo villain entrance, and yes, I'm saying the best, Yoshikage Kira enters in, and after you fight with him, Gappy asks if he's really the Yoshikage Kira, like the one that he's looking for to find out who he is, with part 4 Kira just saying that he already knows that he's not the Kira that he's looking for, which I just think is so small little cool details that they add in with the dialogue that just really makes you realize that they care about JoJo when they were making this. But not much else happens here. Gappy decides to join Josuke as he thinks that the corpse parts can help him realize who his real identity is, and they go back to the part 4 Morioh. But this is when the story gets really good. We see all 8 of the JoJos standing in the circle together. We finally did it. We have all 8 of the main JoJos, but we're still missing one part as there's 9 corpse parts. And I already have to say, it's not going to be part 9 of JoJo. That series was still serializing when this game came out, so they didn't include it. And Yava appears again, saying that the noble one is actually the one that has the missing part, and after a short fight against her and some vampires, she disappears as an earthquake starts to rumble the ground. But it's not your normal earthquake. All of the 8 JoJos are suddenly transported into basically a special dimension. We finally get the full reveal of who the noble one is, which is Dio, gone to heaven. And just look at this design. The Super Saiyan type of hair, the white and gold color scheme, this truly just looks so awesome, and I really wish somehow this was incorporated into the main series, because I just absolutely love this design. Johnny is actually the first JoJo to rush towards him to fight him to get the missing corpse part, with Giorno right behind, the two who Funny Valentine is theorized that could theoretically beat him. But as they attack, the world basically counters them with the punch, basically negating their attacks, with Jojo and Star Platinum heading in right after, actually being able to land a hit, but it takes just one mood attack to knock all 3 of the JoJos back. Dio summons for all of the corpse parts that the JoJos are holding towards him, gaining an immense amount of power when in the nick of time a portal opens up and all the JoJos are able to narrowly escape. But how can they teleport if they just lost all of their corpse parts, you might ask? Well, you see them all teleport to Air Suplina Island, which is from part 2, as Funny Valentine enters in, specifically wanting to fight against Jotaro. And after you beat him, he reveals that since Star Platinum is so similar to the world, it was basically able to cancel out his powers, which is why Jojo's corpse part was still on him, and he was able to use that to transport him and all of the JoJos away. Now, Valentine actually advances the plot so much here. He says that he originally wanted to find all the corpse parts until Johnny fired his infinite spin at him, and as he was traveling through all of the parallel worlds, he found a parallel Dio. A parallel to this world where instead of Jojo defeating Dio in 1988, Dio actually wins, and now that he's already conquered that world, he's now set to conquer all of the parallel timelines, and that this Dio was already so powerful that he was able to negate Johnny's infinite spin off of Funny Valentine, recruiting him to his team. But Valentine truly is just a man of his country, and with Dio wanting to conquer everything, that goes against his goal of protecting his country, so he's actually been pretending to help Dio and basically being a secret agent against him to help people stop him, and after fighting with Jotaro, he realizes that Jojo and Star Platinum are the only hope for someone to be able to defeat Dio. And Valentine gives us another major advancement as well, as Valentine calls out Johnny that he has the same gun that Valentine's used to shoot Gyro, and knows Johnny wants to use that gun to kill Valentine with it. And Valentine actually pulls out the same gun, throwing it into the air as it attracts Johnny's guns towards him, and they both vanish. Valentine basically explains that if two of the same thing from different parallel universes come in contact with each other, they actually cancel out and disappear, and that this world theoretically should have a dead Dio in it, meaning that they may be able to use this Dio against the Dio from the parallel world, and if they come in contact with each other, they should technically cancel each other out. But things are never going to be that easy, because there's one small, actually kind of huge problem with this, and that's the Dio in this world was killed and literally vanished into sunlight because he was a vampire. Valentine at this point just tells the group that there's only one more thing that he has to tell them, and that's that basically Dio's power is the opposite of Gold Experiencer Cream, which Gold Experiencer Cream basically negates reality, and that Dio's power is instead to basically rewrite reality and make anything that he wants the new reality, and says that it's up to them to do what they want with this information, and he vanishes. All of the 8 JoJos come together, and each one of them has their own separate reasons. Josuke wants to save Okayasu. Giorno wants to save Bucciarati. They all have their own separate reasons, but they all agree that they have to find the corpse parts again and make sure that they defeat this Dio, or every world is going to be in trouble now. Now, honestly, the next few parts I'm going to kind of speed through because it's very similar to what we just went through. Essentially, Dio, to safekeep all of the corpse parts, gave it to each of his followers. So the people who are still possessed by Dio, some of them are now holding the corpse parts, and so you now have to go defeat them again to gain all the corpse parts once again. You go back to part 3 and you fight against Darby once again, with this time Jojo raising his soul for more information on Dio, and as you beat Darby, he does reveal that Dio's power is utilizing not just the corpse parts, but is actually using the energies from people's souls. But he says that Pucci should know more about it, and that's really all that he can say. You do gain another corpse part from him, and then you go back to part 7 to get another part from the Zeppellis, and then you go back to Cairo where Jojo defeated Dio, and although Dio's body has vanished, you find Dio's gold bracelets that he wears, with Jojo remembering what Valentine said about when there's 2 items from different parallel universes and when they collide together, so he decides to bring that with. You go back to part 5, saving Bucciarati and finding a corpse part, and then you go back to part 6 again, this time fighting in the prison, which is a different place than you were last time, but you defeat both the Kiras once again, finding yet another corpse part. Now, as we go back into the part 1 Josar's mansion, you do see Dio speaking with Pucci, who tells Dio that Jotaro has already been able to pretty quickly find half of the corpse parts already, which honestly, why would Dio even give all the corpse parts to all his followers? I mean, they would be pretty easy to gain from people like them. It would be better if he just had them himself. Well, Dio's actually able to explain that, saying that he actually doesn't even really need the corpse parts. He needs more so the power from the actual souls of the people, and by giving everyone the corpse parts, he knows that Jotaro is going to go after them, and they're all going to start following him after Jotaro defeats them. So giving people the corpse parts was basically a very easy way for him to know where everyone's going to be at one time. And once he has all these souls is when he's going to finally have enough power to conquer all of the worlds. Before they both leave, Pucci does warn Dio that he is among the traitors on the other side, but then Dio leaves the scene. And Dio doesn't really waste any time, because you see him then go to confront Valentine, being that mysterious person that's a traitor, and he just outright confronts him and then just kills him off. You go back to part 4 getting another corpse part, and then you go back to part 2 where you save both Abdo and Iggy, getting another corpse part, and then you go back to the part 1 Joestar mansion where Jojo confronts Pucci about the secret of Dio's power. Pucci, honestly, at this point is just glazing Dio the entire time, saying about how people need to follow this new reality and how Dio is so strong and powerful and everything. He's practically just saying that he's in love with Dio. Like, okay, bro, we get it. After you beat him up, though, Pucci reveals to Jojo that Dio is after everyone's soul to gain more power. But before he reveals more, with the willpower, I guess, of his love for Dio, he actually just jumps off the ledge onto a statue, sacrificing himself for Dio's cause. So yeah, I mean, in the end of it, Pucci really was the real one for Dio, and he really did just want Dio's goal to be realized, which, I mean, good for him, I guess. Finding a corpse part from Pucci's body, however, you now have collected them once again. So you head back to the Cairo rooftops where Jotaro fought against Dio in the beginning, with all the Jotaros entering in as Dio just sits among the rooftop in the moonlight, just standing there menacingly and just laughing at them. You fight against Dio in his heaven form as a pseudo boss battle for this game, and it's actually a pretty cool fight. Instead of just like the normal way that you fight, he can just randomly teleport around using his stop time power, he can summon lightning, and then he even can turn your own partner against you as he overwrites reality into them becoming your enemy. It is overall pretty normal fight for this game, but those few things just do make it kind of fun. After you finish the fight though, Dio uses his power to teleport everyone that's inside the turtle into a different reality, which, if you remember, is where basically everyone that they've collected alongside this journey are all hiding in that turtle. So he's able to teleport them to a reality and start using that to extract their souls for his power. With the stakes now even higher, as they have to now go save everyone who's teleported to prevent their souls from being taken, Jonathan and the other Jojos tell Jotaro that they think that Jotaro is the only one who has the power to defeat Dio. So all the other Jojos are going to go off and save as many people as they can. That way Dio doesn't get too powerful, and they're going to allow Jotaro to fight against Dio. But of course Jotaro just can't fight alone, so his future daughter Jolene stays behind to help him as the rest of the Jojos go off. You play a few missions as those Jojos who went off to go save some of your friends from being possessed and having their souls taken. I'm just gonna really skip it, it's not that important. Let's get to the main boss battle. Let's get to the ending of this series. You fight against Dio once again in his heaven form, who is now even stronger than before, having gained a few souls for power. But honestly, this fight is basically the same as the first fight against him. He uses his same powers. He turns Jolene into your enemy for a little bit, but afterwards, when you finally finish that, you do get a really cool cutscene of Star Platinum versus the world over heaven. And this honestly is like anime level quality almost. It's a pretty good cutscene. Dio is able to hit Jotaro, but since Star Platinum is so similar to the world, he's actually able to negate the attack, as Dio's power is the overwrite reality, but Star Platinum being so similar, he can essentially overwrite the reality that Dio has already overwritten. And yeah, let's just not make it more complicated than that. And if you say that's just like a plot hole or something like that, that's basically why Star Platinum won in part 3 of the main series anyways. Basically, Star Platinum and the world are very similar stands, so they're able to cancel each other out. So it is what it is. Dio is just a little bit too powerful at this point, and he's even starting to extract Jotaro's soul. And as Jotaro is fading off, he thinks about his entire bloodline that he was able to meet and how much they had to go through to get to this point, and how he just can't give up on his whole family lineage. And then he remembers what Valentine told him about the two items negating each other. So as Dio is going to punch him, he holds up the gold bracelet, with Dio striking it and negating his power, leaving Star Platinum open for an attack. And Jotaro reveals that he was able to figure out that Dio can only use his power whenever he makes contact with something, so whenever he punches something. And for hitting the gold bracelet, it canceled his power out, damaging Dio's arms. And Jojo says that he's gonna allow Dio to heal just enough to then beat him and actually kill him this time. However, Dio being Dio uses his blood to squirt onto Jotaro's eyes, blinding him once again as Star Platinum pummels him, beating him to the ground, almost as if this is a parallel to the beginning fight of this series, which, yeah, I mean, if you haven't told already, this is kind of like about parallel universes, so it ends with it being a parallel to the start as well, which, I mean, I think is actually pretty cool. And in a very similar way to the beginning, Star Platinum defeats Dio and the world, and in doing so, all of the souls are returned to everyone's body. But the story isn't over just quite yet. We then just get a cut to Jotaro back in Egypt, as Joseph and Polnareff come up to him saying that they just got word of him waking up from the hospital. So they both head to the train station, similar to the very start, but this time, instead of Abdul and Iggy coming and being possessed, they're actually able to successfully part their ways. You then see 11 years later, part 4 of JoJo's, as Koichi is walking and bumps into a tall man, and as the camera pans up, you see that it's Jotaro. alongside a very young Jolene, which I've never seen that before, so I think that's really cool that they included this. But you see Jotaro in part 4 all grown up, and you see him with Jolene, and they're looking for the Higashikata family, basically ending the story as if this was a somewhat parallel timeline, and by beating Dio in his heaven form, it negated that reality that he was creating and putting everything back to normal. So some may say it's a little bit of a cop-out, but in a way you can actually say that this may be a canon storyline because everything got put back to normal once you defeated Dio.